Thanks so much. I hope everybody can hear me, and good evening and welcome uh, to our presentation. I'm very happy to be here to talk a little bit about some work that I've been doing for the last 30, 40 years, off and on, but more on past 1991 when we formally got involved with the whole digital equity and digital access movement. And I know that there's a lot of conversation about uh, digital equity, especially in this group, since that's what the group, I guess, is focused on. And now what's happening now? Trying to make sure that we,
I can see your slides are good. I see them.
Oh, you see them? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so, basically what I guess I wanted to make a brief presentation on and share with those of you who are involved in digital equity and technology access over the past 30, I guess 30 years since 1990, is that there's an even longer history of digital equity. Actually, it spans the whole time that we've had computers. IBM introduced its IBM PC in 1981. Apple introduced its Apple IIe in 1977. And so technology from the personal standpoint, not just from the standpoint of large mainframes and corporations, has been around for 40 years or more. And what has always been the conversation that we've had is who had access to that, who was able to use that, who was able to understand it, who was able to work with it. And as we know now, technology, and specifically technology at the individual level, has become a way of life for all of us who know that everything that happens in the world nowadays revolves around some type of technology and technology access. Apple is $1 trillion company, but in 1977, it was, two guys in a garage with an Apple IIe. And so with Microsoft introducing its operating system, and then IBM creating the IBM PC, which at that time was just a 8K, and those of you who have some tech background, 8K, and when I say 5.25 this online and an 8 megabyte hard drive, you'll know that I'm going back a long way to talk about where we were when we started and where we are now with terabit drives and multi-terabit internet access and all of the advances that we've had up until now. And so, of course, recently, we've heard a lot about digital equity, and in some ways, we're hearing more about it now than we ever have, even though it's been around for more than 40 years. We're hearing about it because technology is such a pervasive part of all of the activities that we do as human beings now on the planet that, it's hard to talk about modern day life without talking about technology, and therefore talking about digital equity, which the way we always have looked at digital equity is that digital equity means technology, whatever it is, however it is, how powerful it is, what we're using it for, it should be available to everybody. And, it never has really been available to everybody because, first of all, not everybody has developed the understanding of technology today. We think of technology as a smartphone. We think of technology, in terms of tablets and PCs and laptops. But the real issue with digital equity is not just having it, but being able to use it, being able to use it on the job, being able to use it in school, being able to have the same access to high-speed technology as everybody else. And we don't have that. And so that has always been the issue. You heard the term the digital divide. And the digital divide, when we first started working in 1991, in terms of the organized effort, we worked in the at the access level since 1984 with CTCnet, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when we started really advocating and working in 1991 to really make sure that everybody had access to this technology and access to all the things that this technology would bring, the digital divide was a term, but it had no meaning because there was no such thing as recognizing what a divide was. Computers were tools. They weren't expected to be, ubiquitous in life as they have become. And so people didn't see how their access to or lack thereof would affect them, not just in terms of, work, but home and in every other way. Things we take for granted now, like the internet, which really became prominent in 1993. The things, using the internet, having access to it, those things weren't a part of everyday conversation. But, as we know, now the tech companies are trillion-dollar enterprises. Apple, Microsoft, Google, HP, all the names we know about are now trillion-dollar companies. And a whole lot of people, don't really understand how that's happened. It's sort of like just came in sort of a magical way. You had companies that were doing something like, in the mysterious fashion of calculating and using these tools to write and compute and manage and guide. And now we have all these things that happen all at once. But the digital divide and digital equity are probably going to be the defining issues of the first 30 years of the 21st century. And one of the concerns we've always had in terms of that is, how that happens, who's involved, who has access, and how do we use those tools to not only participate in life, but improve the quality of the life we have. Technology is a way of life. And so, as I mentioned, the companies that we think about now, like I said, Microsoft, Google, AT&T, HP, Facebook with 1 billion users, they never really thought about it either, except as a way to build wealth and make money. They never really took time to really educate people on what technology was really about. They just assumed that would happen, and it didn't. And so the lack of knowledge of access, the lack of knowledge of how tools came about and how to use them, created what we have as divide. And nobody really thought about what that would mean for cities, communities, neighborhoods, people who would, first of all, become aware of the technology, and secondly, how to utilize the technology to as I said, improve their lives and do things that, will help them be more knowledgeable, more educated, and so on. And so, for the most part, what we have seen in community is that efforts to narrow or eliminate the digital divide have been largely ignored by tech companies and society in general. In 1997, we talked about an idea of the digital, to access the technology of the digital right, just like you have access to water, electricity, you have access to housing, you have access to economic opportunity. Technology access was looked at, and we looked at it then in the same way, because we knew that it was going to become as ubiquitous as it has become. And so even though nobody was really talking about the need or the necessity for equity in the digital space, we talked about it, we pushed for it in our communities. Many of us started what we call community technology centers. We put computers in churches, we put computers in, nonprofit organizations. And, we set out on our own to make sure that people that we were connected to and that we knew had access to it. And so, since there was never really a focus on making sure that it was equitably distributed, there became this thing called a digital divide. Some people had access to it. Some people had the money to purchase it. Some people had the time to learn how to use it, but most did not. And so the people who had that access and had that understanding of how to program, how to code, how to use technology in business, how to create new products and services, utilizing and leveraging the technology, they took that knowledge and leveraged it into what we see as wealth, technology as a source of power, a source of data management, a source of information, and a life-changing way of doing things that has caused and helped some become very wealthy, some become very powerful in society, and others that were left behind because they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't have the time to learn, they didn't have access to the tools to learn. And so, the thing that I've always wondered is why the technology companies didn't see that by training everybody, they could become even more wealthy, but they didn't see that. So they didn't do it. And so we had to take up that mantle in communities and work on our own ways of teaching ourselves and gaining access. Even today, if you go to a public school or a high school, grammar school or high school, if you go to a private school, many of them, you won't have coding classes. You won't have access to learning how to use tech skills to become engineers or installers or any of the many other jobs that rely on technology. I think the last thing I read was that one in 4 jobs requires IT knowledge and access. Yet we have more than 25% of the people that don't have access to broadband. In the low income and rural areas, the percentage is even higher. And that's an inequity that has enormous consequences for us as citizens, as individuals in education, in healthcare, in managing the data that is created in every aspect of our lives and guides a lot of decisions that are made at the policy level, at the community level, at the city level. And when you look at that and you see, as the pandemic showed, how the lack of equity and access created enormous problems in healthcare, in education, in our schools, and so forth. You wonder how the prognosticators and the pundits didn't see that, but they didn't. Now we have a situation in the country where the Biden administration has allocated or reported $65 billion to what they term as an all-out effort to create equity, to close the digital divide, to make sure everybody has access to high-speed internet and the internet period, and also the tools of technology. But that is a great goal. It's 25 years coming, 30 years coming from the administration. I remember when Bill Clinton talked about it in the early 90s, but no large commitment was ever made to helping us bridge that digital divide and, focus on equity of access, equity of knowledge, equity of use, equity of the tools that all of us now take, that use them take for granted. So I applaud the Biden administration for that, that related focus and emphasis on how we use technology and how we have access to it in everyday life. But the point being, now that we have that commitment, what are we going to do with it? And how our community is going to be involved, and how are they going to be able to get involved and leverage all the opportunities that $65 billion should open up? There's always been 3 aspects of what we term digital equity. First was, as I mentioned, access. Being able to, see a computer, being able to work on a computer, being able to type on a computer. That, is something that happens everywhere now, but back in the 1980s and early 90s, computers were very expensive. Not all students, no schools really had more than 1 or 2 computers per classroom. And there was really not a lot of training available. The residents did not have access to training in the schools. The colleges didn't have coding classes. I mean, that was that kind of knowledge, that kind of access was considered to be sort of a, something that the so-called geeks did, the so-called nerds did. And it's interesting that, the so-called geeks and nerds run the world now. I guess we would all think of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg as billionaire businessmen. But when they started, they were just kids. They were 16, 17, 18. I think Bill Gates started programming at 14 with Paul Allen. I think that Mark Zuckerberg was 20 when he was at Harvard. Jeff Bezos was just a graduate of, just had come out of Princeton and got a job doing the technology work. And then he decided to start a little thing called Amazon. And so, most of your prescient technology users and mentors were nothing but kids, when they first started. They had access to something that we didn't. And they used that access to learn how to take that knowledge and those tools and leverage them. And they now are the billionaire businessmen that we look at and say, wow, Jeff Bezos was the second or third richest guy in the world. Bill Gates is maybe the third or fourth richest guy. And so, but again, when they started, they were just young kids taking technology and learning about technology and figuring out what can we do with this to solve problems that we see, how can we make money with this knowledge, and they had the opportunity to do that. So as I mentioned also, in the 1980s, we had a lady in New York City in the Harlem community. Name was Antonia Stone. She decided that there needed to be access to these tools. There needed to be, her kids, she was a school teacher, and her observation was that the kids in her school did not have the access to technology that, she thought they should have. So she took it on herself with her own money to start a neighborhood organization called Playing to Win. And that was the first accessible public space in New York City that provided technology so that kids, when they got out of school, could come there and work on the computers and learn about how the computers work, because they didn't have a computer at home. In fact, for a long time, very few people had access to their own PC. And if they had it, it was only one. They had one PC a house. It's like they had one TV a house or one telephone house. Now you can't imagine a place that you live or stay and work that only has one of those things. But for a long time, that's how it was. And so she provided access through her Playing to Win for kids that she was teaching to have access to computers. And that grew into an organization called CTCnet. And by the early 90s, you had a lot of these technology centers starting in different places. In fact, at one time, the organization had 1,500 centers around the country. It's no longer in existence, but at that time, that was the only access that, kids and many adults had to computers and technology, because the schools didn't have them. They didn't have the PCs. They didn't have those tools. And so, and again, remember, that was not initiated by the tech companies. It was not initiated by the corporations and government. This was an effort of ordinary people who saw a need and a necessity for the people in their community, the students in their community, to learn this technology that they knew one day would be dominant in the world in terms of every aspect of life. And so they took it upon themselves to create that. Other efforts followed that. But again, I want to emphasize to you, there was no funding for that. There was no support of that by government or by the corporations that were making millions and soon to be billions and billions of dollars off of, people who bought and used this technology. That, people learned it on their own. There's no such thing as schools for coding. There was no such thing as places where people could learn how to use this. Most good programmers, even today, are self-taught. Even though there's coding boot camps and universities that say they have computer science classes or give degrees in computer science. Bill Gates was a self-taught programmer. He didn't take computer science when he was at Harvard. Jeff Bezos was a self-taught programmer. He started Amazon in Philadelphia and moved across the country. He wrote the first code for what became Amazon. Mark Zuckerberg taught himself how to program, and that's been true for the most part. In the early days of technology, if you didn't acquire it and teach yourself, you didn't know how to use it, and so most of the efforts to spread technology were from people who were interested in it, who knew it was important to know, and volunteered to do that. So here's some of the groups that I mentioned before, and some of these names you may or may not know, depending on how much you know of the history of technology access in the early days. But just in Chicago, where we're located, and also in some parts of the country that we work with, there were groups and individuals who organized these kinds of organizational non-profits. So I guess similar to Chicago Hack Nights efforts to organize over the 500 times that they've met, which I think is remarkable. These were groups that, as I said, just got together and said, hey, this is important to know, this is important to spread. We need to make sure that we can teach this to people. We need to make sure they know about it. Down at the bottom, of course, are some of the organizations that are around and have been around for the last 10 or 15 years in Chicago. And again, the Chicago city government has started the Digital Equity Council here, and they started it just this year, last year. But we've been working on this issue and working on how to provide resources in this issue. Again, since the 90s, we had our first conference for Community Technology Centers Network in 1996, which is 26 years ago. So don't seem like it's been that long, but it has been. And that's when we first brought the idea of community technology centers and technology access to the Chicago area. And then we created some informational goals and books and guidelines that began to spread that message. The term digital excellence was one that we came up with and created in the 90s. And that was when we started doing community technology centers, when we organized funding, which was the first funding ever organized for that kind of technology access work at the state level with the digital divide funding. We called it Eliminate the Digital Divide. It was a state program funded by the merger of SBC and Ameritech, and went for 15 years, and created over 300 centers, trained over 39,000 low-income residents in the basic technology tools and software and hardware that we use today. And just to talk about that, I reproduced in this small short presentation a page from the book, The City of the Network, which is a report we did in 2007. That's 15 years ago, okay? And so many of the things that we talked about in this report, that the ideas and concepts and vision that we created are still things that haven't been done today. And we're still working on a lot of those things. Again, you don't have a citywide network that isn't owned by a corporation in the city of Chicago today. We're trying to start and broadly spread those neighborhood networks, but it's been 25 years, 30 years since AOL was created. And that was the first national accessible internet network. That was not started by AT&T. That was started by a young guy named Steve Case, who built that into, a $1 billion business and later sold it and still is involved in the technology space. So the emphasis that I want to make on these ideas and these concepts in this presentation is that it's always been community. It's never been organized at the government level or the corporate level or the state level. It's always been communities that have carried the water for technology access and, did the work and volunteer. And so what you guys are doing is right in keeping with the volunteer hacker effort. Although we don't call ourselves hacker, but we hacked assets. We hacked the ability to take these tools and do things with them. The people who utilize the ability to make CDs the most were rappers, people who, saw the technology and said, hey, I can make some music. I can copy some CDs and sell them. That's how it usually works. That's why most of the advanced ways of using technology and internet were done by, of all professions, pornography. Why? Because they saw the financial gain they could make by creating websites online that offered things that weren't supposed to be offered, but they took those tools and did that. So that's basically what I want to share. Hopefully, I'll talk with some of you in the break, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I've been at it for a little while. I'm glad to see some advancement and some ubiquity in things that have only been offered in a grudging kind of a manner, to be offered much more widely and broadly, but we got a long way to go. Hopefully by the end of the decade, we won't be talking about a digital divide anymore. I will keep my fingers crossed, and I hope you will be a part of that. And then this is a little bit about me and, my work in the space.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pierre. Yeah, so we have a number of questions. You touched on so many different things. I guess the first one that I have is, and also before I dive into it, folks on the live stream, you can type your questions straight into the chat. We'll make sure they'll get added to the queue. And we do have some time for some questions tonight, so please do ask them. So my first question is, a lot of the work you described is around digital training, right? And that's sort of like a big area of focus for what you do and what these community technology centers have done. As far as sort of, I don't know if it's possible to quantify this, but how much would you ascribe to sort of like the gap being attributed to the training to be able to use the technology versus just having access in the first place, whether that be, as you sort of showed off, that the technology itself, like having a computer or a device, which sounds like is getting better, but now it seems like broadband, right? That's a big one, like having access to internet. So is it kind of equal, like half and half, or is it really?
Yeah, I would say that, that knowledge follows accessibility. I mean, if you have something in your house and you don't know how to use it, and you say, hey, I'm interested in that. I mean, how many people started coding because there was a computer there, or they went to somebody's house and there was a computer there. They didn't know anything about it, but they saw it, they asked about it, and they began to try to figure out how to use it. I know in my own case, in 1981, I was working at First Chicago, and one day they rolled the IBM PC up the aisle and said, hey, here's a new device for you guys to look at and use. They didn't give us an instruction book. There was no manual. It was just here it is, okay? And so, as I mentioned before, that particular PC had 8K of RAM. It had a 5 1/4 floppy drive. You can't even find that anymore. It had an 8 megabit hard drive in it. That's all it was there. It had an amber screen. There was no color screen. and they rolled it up the aisle and said, here's a new tool, no manual, no nothing, okay? So, I just happened to see it because they rolled it up in front of my desk. And I said, what is this? What do we have? I didn't know anything about it. So I just sat down at it and started, trying to see how to turn it on, because I didn't know that, how to use what was in it. What is software? Is that something that comes separately? Do you have any way of being taught how to do that? How do you figure out how to use this stuff? Okay, so you had 3 programs. You had a program called WordStar. You had a program called MailTrack, which is a DBase clone. If you know anything about databases, the old DBase. And then you had another program that was called DOS. Okay, and I think it was DOS 1.0. Okay, that was the operating system. And of course, we could tell all the interesting stories about how that happened and how Bill Gates hooked that up with IBM and all of that. But the point being, nobody knew what this tool was. Nobody knew what to do with it. Nobody knew how it worked. Nobody knew what to work on with it. And so basically people just taught themselves. As I mentioned, almost every great programmer taught himself or herself. Most of them, because there's no school, today, name a school that's known for coding, for programs. You can't name one. I mean, it's at colleges, but they're not known for that, like it's known for engineering or known for some other profession. So most of your coders, your programmers teach themselves. And that's just still that way. And it's 30 years now. So that's why I say, it's access, and it's, then when you have access, you sit there and you try to figure it out. Like you're playing a musical instrument, or like you're trying to do anything else that you want to really master and do. And so the challenge always was, when we first saw it, we said, hey, we like to have one. But in those days, it was $3,000-$4,000 to get a PC. Nobody could afford that. So that's where the public access came in, where you had the people who said, hey, I got one in my house, come by and take a look. Then you had someone who would open up a room, like Antonia Stone. She just found a storefront and she put computers in it because she wanted her kids to have that. She took her own money and bought computers and said, hey, come after school and learn how to use this, okay? That's how almost all sites start. That's how almost all access efforts start, is like that, okay? There was no government money that said, hey, we're gonna buy this for you, or we're gonna subsidize this. The corporations looked at it as they were making money. They weren't gonna give you that. They wanted you to buy it, so they weren't gonna, just, hey, give, really though, they figured out that if they give it away, they'll get more people. They figured that out a long time after they started. So again, I think that what we know is that access is the first step. But after that, you have to learn how to use it. You have to know how to do something with it, okay? Because it's no good to you just to have one. You gotta, do what we're doing. I mean, what we're doing right now was unheard of 5 years ago. There was no Zoom. There was no ability to communicate with people across these different venues and tools, So, and that's how it developed. Somebody was curious enough to make it work and then see how they could use it to leverage it and make some money. That's how it goes.
At the next one, Michael?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess on that point of communication, one of the questions here is there a space on the web or internet that you would recommend where people are talking together about these issues? If so, what's the website?
I don't know that there is, although I'm sure there are many, but one in particular. I mean, Facebook has become what, the town hall for everybody. If you want to say something to somebody, you put it on Facebook, right? I don't know if it was ever, I think Mark Zuckerberg wanted to find girls. And so he started that at Harvard to, get girls to come on. It, was like a meet and greet type of software. He called it the Facebook, and it was like, who's the hot looking person that I can get on here, and then it evolved into all these other uses that it has evolved into over the last, I think it started in 2004. So, I mean, over the last 16 years, 18 years, it's evolved into what it is now. It didn't start that way. So I don't think that like I said, you can go to any number of, sites and type in community computing, or technology access. You can find thousands of people who say they're doing that, who are introducing that computer clubs that started. I don't know, some of them may still be out there now, but there are a lot of people in different cities and different places that are doing that, But if I could say one, no, there's a lot of, But the thing is that, knowledge is collaborative. When you collaborate on knowledge, you gain knowledge. And that's really what we haven't had is an agreement that we need to do that. The library put computers in because somebody asked for it. They didn't put it in because they said, oh, we see that they need that. Somebody came in and said, hey, do you have a computer in here? And they said, they had to say no. So they put 4 or 5 computers. But go to a library now and try to use a computer. Just go to one in the city of Chicago and look and see what they call a computer room. It's like 3, 4 computers lined up, and most of those are used for looking up books. They're not used for communication. They're not used for knowledge and access, and we're in 2022. So,
I'm actually kind of curious, following up on that, especially in the sort of, COVID times that we're in now. What does a community technology center look like? I mean, you just kind of described what the libraries have
okay.
traditionally, but what about some of the
now,
more successful ones?
Yeah, so usually the typical community center, technology center, historically has been a church or a nonprofit organization. They have a spare room. They get some old computers. If you look at the technology recycling movement now, all it is, people recycling i3s and, older systems. They don't have any of the newer stuff. They hardly got the internet. Look at how the Connect Chicago program worked in terms of getting access to Comcast. That was at one megabit last year. They were giving out 1 megabit. Now, what can you stream for 1 megabit? Just think about it.
We couldn't have this call on that.
Absolutely. But we're talking about 2021, 22. Ken Griffin gave $50 million to start it, and the best they could do was 1 megabit. Now they did increase it this summer because they got so many complaints. I think it's 25 now. Okay. But what can you do with even 25 megabit? I mean, if you go to Comcast, or if you go to AT&T, if you go to Netflix, try to stream Netflix on 25 megabit. Can't do it. Even though that's 25 times faster than what they put out at the start of the pandemic. So this is the kind of thing I'm saying. We're not keeping up with where technology access is now. We're not keeping up with technology the way it is today. That's what I'm talking about. And we live in the second decade of the 21st century. And we still got this issue, okay? And why? Because the technology companies are greedy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to give that away. They charge you for it, okay? 50, they had $50 million. They had 100,000 kids they were going to try to wire up with, technology because of the pandemic. They only got about half of those after 2 years, and it's still only 25 megabits. It's not 100, it's not, streaming speed. So these are the issues that we see, not just in terms of access, but in terms of the understanding of the people who should know better, how we need to spread this technology out and why it should be up to date and up to par. If you work in a corporation and you don't know how to use Excel, you don't know how to use the internet, you don't know how to use Slack, you don't know how to use Trello, you can't hardly work in a company today without that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And how many people come into those corporations and knowing how to do that? And we're talking about 2022.
Mm-hmm.
See, you and I, we're techs. So it's not the same, okay? We don't think about it the way they do. We think about it because, maybe we got caught up in it at a very early age. We live and breathe knowing this stuff. The average person does not do that. They don't, the average worker does not do that. They don't come into the corporation with that knowledge because nobody taught them that. Who teaches somebody how to use Slack? Who teaches somebody how to use Trello? Who teaches somebody how to use Excel? Look at how Excel is, 20 years old, 25 years old? Who teaches them how to do that? I bet you if you said a macro to anybody today in Excel, they wouldn't know what that was. How do you make them? What is a macro? So this is the kind of challenge that we have. There's a divide between knowledge and access. Access is one thing, but knowledge and fluency is really what we need to really get it widely circulated.
Want to get the next one, Michael?
Sure. Yeah. I guess on that point, one of the things I was curious about too is, do you see there being any kind of unique challenges around access or education that are unique to Chicago or to Cook County that are different than other places in the US?
Well, let me share what Google said I don't know if you know that Google tried to wire Kansas City a few years ago. They offered the whole
fiber.
city. They tried to offer them wiring the whole city. They said they wouldn't come to Chicago because they didn't like, the way that they would have to operate in Chicago. Okay, now you can take that any way you want, but I believe it means that they find that the politics and, the different hurdles they would have to jump over were ones that they didn't want to deal with, And so if that means that Chicago is different, I guess it is. I always see, this is going to be interesting. I looked through your guest list and I saw you had Devin Bronstein on there. Okay. So, I met her, of course. We did a meeting with her. We did a meeting for her at Black Star, and it was well attended. And she's an interesting person, But I think about, who she is in terms of what she represents in access and what part of it she comes, she's a UC grad, okay, and there's nothing wrong with being a UC grad, okay? But what I'm trying to say is the people who we're trying to reach aren't UC grads, okay? They're ordinary citizens who want a job, who want to be able to get a prescription online, who use the phone for Uber, who use it for, Uber Eats and, DoorDash and those things, who do the practical thing with technology. That's one part of it. Now think about the people who have the knowledge of how to create those kind of tools. Okay, those are the people that we're trying to end the digital divide with, because that's who's going to end it. When it becomes ubiquitously used like that, that's when you won't have that anymore. As long as you have this gap in knowledge, as long as you have this gap in people's utility of this work, of these tools, of this access, you're always going to have a divide. There's always going to be people who leverage that. And the tech companies created that because they didn't, at the same time they were creating the software, they didn't create ways to learn it, how to use it. They didn't care about that. They didn't go to the schools. The only group that did that was Apple.
I remember
Apple was the one. Yeah, they went to the schools and said, "Hey, we want your students to learn our tools." Smart doing that because that created a market, right? And that's how they got into the corporations. That's how they got their software into. That's how they beat Microsoft. Okay, because they introduced it to the schools, and people took that introduction and they said, "Hey, what computer should I use for graphics? What computer should I use for music? What computer should I use for programming? What computer should I use for design and art, digital art?" Apple. And that's why. But the other company didn't see that. They sold it. Belatedly, they saw it after Apple started, selling everything and having all this, what do they got, 1 billion iPhones out there now? Okay. they emphasized the utility of what they created, and they made sure people could learn it and use it, and they made sure they could do that in a way that it was adopted. So they're $1 trillion business. Now, I wouldn't mind being Microsoft either, but Apple is the biggest company in the world now.
Sure. Yeah, well, that's interesting to think about. I'm kind of curious, one last thought, because I know we're just about at time, but to your point about finding those those sort of tinkerers, those curious folks who really, by not having the technology in front of them, it sounds like you're describing it as like there's a missed opportunity there, right? Like they're not able to, they can't imagine what they can't see, right? I'm kind of curious, obviously the city of Chicago now has like a computer science for all initiative, and coding is being more taught in schools. And then there are computers in schools now more. Are we getting to that point where, is that one of the avenues to get there, or is it need to happen?
I would hope to God we are, but I don't really see that we are. I mean, go to any public school now you want to go to. Count how many computers are in there, and count what the students do with those computers that are there.
Mm-hmm.
Just go there. Just sit down and ask your technology teacher, what do you do with these kids all day with these computers? How many of them know how to do basic code? We don't even use BASIC anymore. We used to have a software language called BASIC. We don't even use it. Okay. So, we have to have people who introduce this technology who can communicate the utility of the technology. We have to have people who can communicate everyday utility, not just, I want to, because most people don't want to write a smartphone app. What they want to do is find knowledge that they're looking for. They want it to be presented in a way that they can use it. If you tell them that the computer can make them some money, now you got their ear.
Right.
How do you do that? How can I create my own job? How can I create a side hustle? How can I use this to improve my life?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they want to know. And so that's why we still have a divide. And so until we get to that point where that's not a question, then you'll see the ubiquity grow. And that's going to benefit everybody.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's great. I think we have to leave it there because we're a little bit over time. But yeah, Pierre, I just want to really thank you for your time. You brought a perspective that I think we don't oftentimes get at our events. So I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing.
Well, I'm glad to do it. And one reason I wanted to do that is because I know you don't get that perspective. Our work that I'm talking about has been largely in the shadows for decades. We've worked on these things a long time, and hopefully some of the things that we've done have made some difference in somebody learning something or having access to it. I hope it did. But, we got a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, didn't you write, you're Derek Eater, didn't you write the city's data program? Aren't you the coder for that?
I've done some work with the city. You might need to get more specific.
I think it's called Data Made, isn't that what?
Oh yeah, Data Made. That's my company. Yeah.
Yeah, that's your company. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I keep up with some things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Got it right.
Yeah, because I've gone on it. I've used it. If it comes out, I use it. I don't know if you remember Dan O'Neill, who was with Smart Chicago. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
He will, if he's around somewhere, he will tell you that he credits having that job to me.
Oh, really? That's a story.
Mm-hmm. If you talk to him, tell him I said hi.
All right, I will.
Okay.
Great. Well, I think we gotta end the stream now. But again, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks again, Pierre, for your time.
Anytime.
We'll see everybody next time.
One more thing I'd like to say too is we have an initiative that we've created called Technology in the Hood. Okay. Again, trying to bring together all of the people who have been working in this field for a long time Some names you might know, most you probably won't. But the idea is, to end this digital divide by making access and learning and utility at the community level more than just, paying more than just lip service. So the idea is to create a whole bunch of community technology centers and maintain those so that everybody can have access to learning, to knowledge. And so we've been trying to do this a long time. And, I think now is the time with digital divide being highlighted by the pandemic, and people are focusing on what technology should have done and didn't do. The state got the Office of Broadband. The state has Illinois Connect, and I understand they're doing some things. The Benton Foundation, who I knew Charles Benton very well when he was alive, they're pushing it. Like I said, there's $65 billion that's out there. Devin and her Digital Equity Council are trying to organize belatedly with the intent of bringing the city into line with resources. And so I think that people who are out there who want to be more involved, hands-on, there's an opportunity for that. And I hope we get a chance to see some of the people, that listen to your live stream or in your organization. I hope that we can get them involved in that because it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you have more information to share about that, I'm happy to pass it along to
Sure. Yeah.
everybody.
I will.
Know,
Yeah.
And some of the Chai Commons folks, I'm sure, are already involved in they're part of this group as well.
Okay.
Cool. Well, we gotta end it here. One last thing to share is we this one. Yes. We have a post presentation live stream. So if folks want to head on over, Michael's already over there. I'll drop this link in the chat as well. But we're going to start that part of the call if it hasn't started already now. Pierre, you're welcome to join us if you have time. I'll share it with you as well.
Yeah, I was looking for the link.
Yep, I'll drop it in the chat here for us.